Good evening. Today is July 16th, 2018. I'm Kevin Graves. Welcome to another episode of Veterans Voices. Tonight we'll be talking about cannabis use in the veteran community. We'll be speaking with several veterans, a VA psychiatrist, and others about this issue and how it affects veterans. I am grateful to be joined tonight by my co-host and Air Force veteran, Kira Serna.
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here. Thank you for tuning in to what will surely be an interesting conversation. Let's watch as a few veterans briefly describe their experiences with cannabis. We'll be right back.
I remember looking to my left and I saw my brother. I'm like, damn, this is a dream. Please tell me it's a dream. And then I saw him crying, and I saw my mom crying. I saw my dad cry, of course, my sister. And then I went to do one of these. And everything just went to hell for me after that. I realized that there was no muscle there. There was nothing there. I couldn't even do this to get up anymore.
About 10 years ago, it seemed that veterans started slowly disclosing to me that they were using marijuana to try to treat a variety of symptoms, not just PTSD, but a whole bunch of things.
Cannabis helps me tremendously with my anger management specifically.
It's great for pain, it's great for anxiety, it helps me sleep through the night.
It gave me my way of life back.
PTSD is such a complex syndrome. It's got all these different target symptoms, and we treat each symptom with a different prescription medicine.
For cannabis, I would go into crowds and instantly I would be looking for the threats. You know, where's the biggest guy?
It made me want to do all the things that I no longer felt like doing when I was on the pill.
Thank you for joining us for our 48th episode of Veterans Voices. The purpose of our program is to connect veterans and their families with resources and benefits. If you're at home watching and want to join our discussion, please feel free to call us right now at 925-313-1170. Our phone lines are open and we're excited to take your calls. You can also send us an email at veteransvoices@contracostatv.org or connect with us on Facebook at Veterans Voices 1.
As a disclaimer for our conversation tonight, we wanted to say that we are not encouraging veterans to stop taking prescription medications. Our intention is to have a balanced conversation about veterans and cannabis and to work towards weakening the stigma that often prohibits veterans from talking about cannabis with their providers or community.
We'd also like to take a moment to recognize the service of U.S. Army veteran Adelbert Schomburg. Adelbert entered the Army in 1941 and served with the 2nd Armored Division during World War II. He spent 107 days in combat theater until the war ended. Thank you, Rocky Torres, for allowing us to display your uncle's shadow box on our set tonight.
Now we would like to welcome Ryan Miller and Sarah Payan to the show.
Hey, you guys.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being on the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Ryan.
Okay, my name's Ryan, originally from New York. I'm an Army veteran, and my journey to cannabis was through an injury, unfortunately. In 2007, I was deployed to Iraq as an infantry officer. Was on the wrong side of a big boom, and found myself pretty seriously wounded. My leg was mangled pretty badly. I had a lot of soft tissue and organ damage. Any other year, if it had even been a year earlier in this current conflict in OIF, Iraq, I wouldn't have survived. But fortunately, the advancements in medicine and all that stuff on the battlefield helped me survive. But, okay. So as I was recovering, though, I spent about 3 years recovering. I had my leg, and I was under pretty heavy doses of painkillers for the better part of those 3 years. So I saw how it was negatively affecting me and my peers around me that were also recovering. Fortunately, I actually through an amputation, I had my leg for those 3 years. One of the reasons I was in a lot of pain. I had an amputation in between that and a really strong support system, and some good things coming up in the pipe in the future. I was able to not easily, but transition off opiates and into a recovery mode and move on with my life. In 2014, so I went to grad school after that. In 2014, I came out to California to work at a tech startup, real original, right? And after probably about 6 months, I finally had the time to start getting integrated into the veteran community. And that's where I started talking to a lot of folks who were telling me, cannabis saved my life, because they saw my injury. We talked about that. They asked me, "Do you smoke? Do you use cannabis?" And I said, "No." So I keep meaning to try it just for the novelty of it, because we're in California. But yeah, I had a lot of people. I had people telling me this cannabis has saved my life. And at first you're like, okay, good job, and you think it's a lot of hyperbole. But then as veteran after veteran tells you this, you start to believe it. And then as I look back to all those other veterans that I recovered with, who were around the country, folks who lived in states without access to it, I knew people there that were either still struggling or were no longer alive. And I guarantee you it's because of either directly or indirectly from the medications they were taking. And I met, again, folks out here who were thriving and telling me they're using cannabis some every day. So that's kind of got my initial interest peaked, and then through a whole bunch of, just unexpected life, kind of past circumstances, I wound up founding myself in cannabis. And now I'm a cannabis entrepreneur. I run a brand, OMG Farms. I also do advocacy at both the federal and state level with an organization called the Veterans Cannabis Project.
And that's a great segue to Sarah. Tell us about you, a little bit about you, Sarah, and what you're involved in.
Sure. I am the public education officer for the Apothecarium in San Francisco. I'm also the vice chair of the legalization task force for San Francisco as well. And I'm a writer for Cannabis Now. And I'm also, beyond education, on a dispensary level, I'm working with CCSF. We just did our first workshop on cannabis education at our Mission District campus. So I found cannabis because I'm a stage 3 colon cancer survivor. I'm 7 years out. And my mother is a retired cancer researcher, so I knew THC would be good for nausea, getting me eating again, and for pain management. And for me, as a colon cancer patient, constipation is deadly. And so anti-nausea drugs and opiates were things that I was not able to readily use. So I was able to use cannabis instead, which kept me safe. And I never thought I would be working with cannabis or cannabis education, but it's been an honor to be able to hold space for those who suffer.
In my line of work as a therapist, I have a lot of veterans coming to me saying that they're using cannabis for PTSD, anxiety, is helping with their anger. So a lot of them say that they're using it medicinally. Can you speak a little bit to what's the difference between medicinal and recreation use?
Personally, I always say that whether it's recreational or medicinal, it's something that creates a reaction in your body. And we're all really different. We're walking chemistry experiments, so we all behave very differently. I wouldn't say that cannabis is a panacea and that it's for everyone. What you really have to do is, when I'm in my classes and I'm talking to people, cannabis is a rare opportunity for us to have a moment to be in touch with our bodies and see what's going on. And so I encourage journaling and starting slow and low with dosage, because what's good for one person isn't good for another person. Even in the case of when we're talking about CBD and people really think that that's the most medicinal cannabinoid, that's not necessarily true. Some people actually, it can give them the blues if they have certain types of depression. And for some people it can make them drowsy, for some people it can be uplifting. But it's amazing because we do work with a lot of people who deal with PTSD, and CBD really helps, and they're able to use those, and working with their doctors sometimes even get off of benzos.
So speaking of dosing, how does that work? Because if you're taking a prescription medication, you know exactly how many milligrams you're taking. If someone is using this medicinally, how do they know what dose to take, and how do they manage that?
We always say slow and low. The key is the lowest amount of cannabinoids to create the desired reaction in the body. So if we're working with something like THC, we're looking at about 2.5 to 5 milligrams to start. But really, this is about empowering the patients to figure out how their bodies work with cannabis. So the journaling, writing when you're taking it, how much you've taken. Before this starts even though, doing a body scan and really seeing how you feel physically and mentally, keeping track of that. And then as you start to feel the effects, depending on the mode of medication, writing down what's working and what's not working, because we see patterns in how people react to cannabis, and that way we can narrow it down to find the dosage that works well for each individual.
And what if someone has some negative effects like paranoia or something like that? How
That's
do you deal
all
with that?
good information. What I always say is, if you come to visit and get a consultation, we may not get it right the first time, but every bit of information that you bring back is important. It could be that you need to take less. It could be that it needs to be another mode of medicating. And for some people, they're very sensitive, and so they have to do something that's entirely non-euphoric, or maybe not at all. Because in my private practice, I work with pain management specialists, and I have patients who are really sensitive to pain medications, and they have adverse reactions to cannabis. It's not for them. But no matter what, know that you're safe.
Ryan, you're in the business. When we talk about, I'm a little confused in that when Kara asked about dosage, how do you regulate the dosage? I mean, I've been around for a while, and it was, we didn't have any other way but smoking weed. I heard that people smoked marijuana in the day, and there was no way to detect dosage unless it was good or bad. I mean, that was all we knew, or that's all that we knew. Tell me, how does dosage work, and how is it ingested now? Are there different? Obviously, there's different means and ways of doing that. I don't want to make it sound like I don't have any idea, but how do you regulate dosage?
Yeah, and that's, again, this is something we can go on for a very long time about, but what's interesting is from a business perspective, in the illicit business, that's what's actually driven, in some ways, because of the lack of research due to the regulations behind it, it's really been just, businesses creating products, legally or illegally or now legally, and just, then getting anecdotal feedback from folks. And that's one of the things that we want to address, both as a community and as an industry, is that as this comes more out into the light, we can do more, research on this, targeted, get more money spent on it, so we can isolate. Everybody knows THC and CBD, but there might be 100, I think there's 160. I've seen a bunch of different numbers, but there's at least dozens of other cannabinoids present, even in trace amounts. And some of them we're not sure what it does.
I appreciate that, Ryan. We have a phone call, and we like to take these phone calls. We have somebody on the line from Sacramento. Ryan, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, we can hear you fine. Why are you calling tonight?
You invited me to call. Basically, what we do is social support groups for veterans at cannabis dispensaries throughout Northern California.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So we prevent suicide and opiate overdose with access to compassionate, in other words, complementary cannabis products and education. We also form positive narratives about our experiences, and we practice mindfulness and practice meditation through IRS, yoga, nidra.
Hold on, right? You're breaking up in studio a lot. I don't know if it's also occurring on air or not.
No.
Any help from the studio on that?
So believe it or not, so his name, he's the other Ryan Miller, I'm also Ryan Miller. I can talk as long as he doesn't mind.
Ryan, we're having some problems with your connection right now, so we'll let Ryan. Are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we can hear you better now. Go ahead.
Okay, good, yeah. So about a dozen times every month, we meet for 90 minutes all throughout Northern California, and we'll have discussions. We'll distribute free cannabis products and educate about the safe consumption, and then we meditate. And the goal is to prevent suicide and opiate overdose through practicing mindfulness and curating community.
Well, that's fantastic, Ryan. We really appreciate you calling in. It sounds to me like there's a common theme here about being in touch with what you're doing. I mean, I hear, Sarah, you were saying that, and it sounds like Ryan tries to do that with the people that, that he's working with in his groups through the meditation and other things. So it's kind of you have to learn about it on your own and individually.
It's a rare opportunity to have a quiet moment and get in touch with yourself.
And Sarah, real quick, you brought a couple of examples to show the different methods. Can you show us that real quick?
Sure. So I just brought a few things, but some of our more popular things. A lot of people, when they first are looking for relief, are afraid of euphoria. And so a lot of times what we'll suggest, especially around pain management, is something like a topical. So this is a small sample. of a 3-to-1 THC to CBD topical.
Okay.
And where would you apply that?
You could apply that anywhere on the body where you have pain. And it's also really healing. It's more healing than aloe vera or lavender, so you can actually use that on scrapes, cuts, blisters, and it heals nicely. And there's no euphoria involved with that.
It's really powerful. It's surprisingly powerful what just rubbing this stuff on your skin can do for the underlying joints and muscles.
Okay.
I have permanent neuropathic damage to my hands and feet, and using a topical like that or like a Epsom salt soak like this,
Very interesting.
I can walk on my floor barefoot, which doesn't happen all the time.
Now, will you test positive for a drug test if you use this?
Topical use, no.
Okay.
No, you won't have the metabolites in your
Good
system that
question, though.
test out. Really good question. We have a lot of people who are worried about that.
So it's more like an ointment. You would use it as you would an
Yeah.
ointment to relieve pain or
Right, like
okay.
your Bengay or Tiger Balm or something like that. Or even, you know, if you were using it for like to heal skin, if you had like an abrasion or something. Yeah, it's just a great salve. Another thing that we do a lot of work with are tinctures. And so this is an 8-to-1 CBD to THC tincture. And normally we'll look at like about a 1/4 milliliter under the tongue to start, holding for 40 seconds for maximum absorption. And you get the results within about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on your personal metabolism. Now that will show positive on a test.
Okay.
Because even with the ratios of high CBD to low THC, those metabolites will show up.
And really briefly, real quickly, I mean, go through what we have. We're running kind of short on this segment. So
sure.
what else do you have there for us?
So other things we have teas,
Okay.
if you want to drink it. And these have other synergistic herbs that create the effects. Capsules,
Okay.
and this is a 2-to-1 CBD to THC capsule. And also if people want to
Are
smoke.
these free samples? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding, folks.
And then also you can do something like the packs if you want to vaporize your flowers, which toasts the plant, so there is no smoking involved. So there are no carcinogens.
Thank you for bringing those. I would have never known all the different possible ways that you can ingest or use cannabis to your benefit. I want to thank you both for being with us tonight. As I said, the segment went by very quickly. But we just want to thank you for being with us and for getting this information out. Thank you.
5-second pro tip. Pure CBD, if you get too anxious, smoking cannabis will actually knock the anxiety right out of you. It's amazing. So cannabis cures its own issues that it creates.
Yep, it downregulates it.
Very interesting.
Thank
We
you
will
for
be
that
right
information.
back with Eric Gappel and Etienne Fontaine.
Thank you, Eric and Etienne, for being on the show tonight.
Welcome, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
Brief bio. Tell us a little bit about your veteran experience and a little bit about yourselves.
Sure. I'll start. I'm an Army veteran. I served from 2004 to 2011. I was in Special Operations Forces for about 6 years, doing communications and intelligence support, and did 2 tours to Iraq and 1 to the Philippines before I got out. Did some time as a defense contractor, ended up in D.C. After completing my degree through the GI Bill, and been working in national security and Veterans Affairs policy for the last couple of years.
Etienne.
My name is Etienne Fontaine. I'm the Vice President and Director of Berkeley Patients Group. I'm a veteran of the Desert Storm. I was in the Army National Guard and was activated to the Army. I sustained some injuries and then was recommended medical cannabis for my Gulf War syndrome, as well as a wasting syndrome I was going through at the time. And since then, I've basically put my freedom on the line, providing medical cannabis for the past 18, 19 years now.
But you're no longer at risk from that with the new laws, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Currently, no. Well, federally, of course, yes.
Sure.
But statewide, no.
Okay. Good, good.
And can either of you tell us about how you've seen cannabis help veterans?
Sure. I came to cannabis as an issue from the policy side. I am a cannabis consumer. I use that to deal with a variety of sleep disturbance issues, and primarily getting to bed, staying to bed, nightmares, things of that nature. So I've seen how it's affected me personally, and and beyond, of course, just the sleep effects. I found it very, especially after a long time of being very angry and alternating between depression and rage. Stemming from service and seeing it's a long period of time to have to see a lot of your friends and associates go through and just sort of get ground down by the forever war that we're still fighting. Right. There was a service member just killed this week, right? So, this, I've seen the impact of the wars, and I've seen how it's helped me. And since we've gotten into this as advocates, we have seen. I mean, we've heard, individually from dozens of different veterans from multiple generations, Vietnam, Iraq, Korea, of how cannabis has helped them for the same reasons. Dealing with PTSD, chronic pain, sleep disturbances, everything from anxiety and depression. And I always like to say, don't claim it's any kind of silver bullet, but it does seem to help a lot of people with a broad range of conditions.
And so when you walk into a dispensary in California, you can either buy cannabis recreationally or medically, right?
Correct.
And they're taxed differently, is that correct?
They are taxed differently. Each county has its own tax, as well as local municipalities are allowed to pass their own taxes as well. So there's the 15% over-the-counter tax, which is to the state, no matter if you're medical or recreational. And then depending on where you exist, you could have taxation that goes upwards of approximately 34%.
So what's the difference between buying recreational cannabis versus medical?
Having an actual doctor's recommendation, or in my case, I have a state card which is issued by your government's health department, and that, of course, lets you bypass the other taxes, and so you only pay the 15% over-the-counter tax.
Okay, so there's some tax benefits too.
That is the only difference currently. All the cannabis is actually in child-proof containers and tested currently.
And so, well, one issue now, to be able to buy it medicinally, you have to have a recommendation from your primary care doctors, right?
Correct.
And so now, how does that impact veterans? Because the VA does not yet allow their doctors to give recommendations. So if veterans are getting their health care through the VA, how does that work?
That has been challenging. I have actually, but just by mentioning my cannabis use, I've been removed from 4 different VA facilities just for mentioning that as a medicine, because I was then known as a known drug user, because I was mentioning the use of cannabis willfully, and so I lost all my benefits. Myself, I had to have a job and find a regular physician, so that my regular primary physician was the one who recommended it. Currently, gentlemen like Eric here are working at the federal level, lobbying to affect the change through the VA, so that veterans like myself and many others don't have to live with the shame and the stigma, or being made to feel like a second-class citizen like we have in the past.
And now, I know on the VA website it does say that they've now come to the point to where they want the veterans to tell their providers and not to have fear of losing their benefits. So some changes have happened already, but it sounds like veterans who use the VA will still have to pay or buy it recreationally versus medicinally.
Well, I mean, to that, I would say, and this ties back into hearing directly from veterans about their cannabis use. I mean, it's from all over the country, from states where there is no, even medical program, right, where vets are medicating. There is a great deal of hesitancy to tell, your doctor, even in legal states, that you're medicating with cannabis. The VA does not have, let's say, the greatest reputation when it comes to, I think, treating veterans who are medicating with cannabis appropriately. I'd put it that way. I think we've encountered veterans who have when they have talked about their cannabis use to their primary care provider at the VA, they are marked down as having a cannabis use disorder, right? Now, technically, it's not supposed to, your cannabis use is not supposed to be used against you in any way, but they also make the qualification that they can adjust your medications based on your use of cannabis. So, it's certainly far better than it was, but I think there's still a lot that needs to be done, both educating veterans and educating doctors in the VA.
So part of what you do through your advocacy in D.C. and in your lobbying that you're doing is to bring about that awareness and try to get the federal government to start to acknowledge what some of the states have done.
Sure.
So, because it kind of ties the VA's hands somewhat, because you're asking them to recommend or to work with something that is federally against the law. And even though the feds aren't going to come into California and bust everybody that's because California said it's okay, the VA is still kind of a controlled area under that federal law. Have you made any headway with that?
I mean, I certainly understand the VA is a federal agency, right? And the federal government defines, cannabis and all derivatives as a Schedule I substance. No established medical use and a high rate or a high abuse potential. So both of those things on its face we know to be incorrect. So it's not a question of, does cannabis have medical value? Is it as risky as, other things on Schedule I, which include, heroin and methamphetamine? So they've already acknowledged, the federal government has an issue on their hands in that they are pushing a law that is not based in evidence. It's being essentially ignored by about 30 states to varying degrees at this point. And veterans are stuck in the middle because they are the only population that the federal government has to provide care for exclusively, essentially, right? And that is something that, provide the best care to veterans. Well, millions of veterans are saying, that this is helping them. The evidence that exists at the moment supports that it needs to be reassessed, and that's what we're ultimately pushing for.
And so what policy initiatives are coming up now that may potentially help with that?
Sure. We are supporting a bill in Congress right now called the VA Medicinal Cannabis Research Act. It's H.R. 5520 and S. 2796 in the Senate. This bill is relatively modest in what it sets out to do. It will essentially put the VA on a path to creating a plan to decide whether or not they're going to study cannabis. That is how modest its intent is. This bill, however, is the only piece of cannabis legislation, cannabis-related legislation, that has ever gotten out of a congressional committee. So right now, it's awaiting a vote in the House. It has not yet been scheduled. That's what we're out here, partly in California, to do in the next couple of months. We're organizing in support of this bill because essentially there's so many things in the news, as we can all probably pick up on, that cannabis as an overall issue does not really get much bandwidth in Congress. Gotcha. So in order to put this on at the front of their mind, we, the people and veterans specifically, need to be advocating and speaking out and telling their elected representatives how this is benefiting them and how and others that they might know.
Sounds like a slow process. First you go with the research. I mean, to pass a bill just to be able to do the research. I'm surprised that the private sector hasn't picked up and come through with some research that would be beneficial.
Well, GW Pharmaceuticals just completed a study of cannabis-derived CBD in the form of a drug called Epidiolex, which has been approved by the FDA for treating very specific kinds of seizure disorders. So, but at the moment, the DEA has not rescheduled CBD. So, for all intents and purposes, it's still Schedule I, despite being approved by the FDA.
Well, anyway, I appreciate you guys. Any other comments that you have with regards to some of the challenges you have operating here in California?
No, we're fortunate to have been here for, we're turning 19 in October. It's just basically for us, it's been a love of realizing that we can't wait for the government to get this cannabis into patients' hands. So we've been risking our freedom for almost 2 decades now to make sure that that is available and accessible. And we've seen firsthand the great work that it's done for veterans, and that has also cemented our resolve and to continue to do what we do.
Well, thank you both so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate you.
We want to take a quick moment to tell you about next month's show. In August, we'll be talking about opioid addiction in the veteran community. We'll speak with veterans, mental health professionals, and other veterans. Please be sure to tune in. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Mary Knox with the local DA's office. But first, this brief video of Ryan Berg, who had a chance to speak with veterans about cannabis use.
Sir, what are your general thoughts about marijuana use in the veteran community?
I was a heavy-duty marijuana user when I was in. I personally can't smoke it anymore. For those that smoke it for medicinal purposes, for pain, it's great.
Well, I think it's for anybody if they need it, and they've okayed it in California, so I don't see no harm in it. Same as alcohol, you shouldn't drive a car. You know, same rules should apply.
Have you, how have you seen marijuana help a veteran specifically in a positive way?
Well, the pain takes the pain away, and some people can't eat. They just have to smoke a little bit of that, and they get hungry. So I haven't smoked weed in years, so I don't know.
A general use it's more of a positive than a negative. It's from my understanding right now that the VA does not offer any cannabis options, and a lot of my friends do partake in that, and it helps their symptoms, PTSD, seizures, epilepsy. It helps them tremendously. So I think that it should be offered. I don't personally use it, but more power to you. If it's a good medicine, it should be available for everybody.
I'm not opposed to it. If there's medical research that's National Institute of Health, and it's sanctioned, and the research says that it's beneficial to veterans medically, as long as it's monitored and not abused, I think it should be used. There's concerns with it, though, is just like opioids. How do they monitor that so people aren't maybe falling asleep or whatnot on the roads? So there's got to be there's beneficial use, but there also has to be precautions.
I'm for and against, I'm a recovering drug addict, man. Marijuana was a gateway drug. And especially for vets, man, who are still sort of psychologically and spiritually cut off. I think marijuana just contributes to that isolation, man. War does something to a man's head, and so hiding is not the answer.
It's probably better than most of the prescription drugs that have helped people with whatever they're ailing. It seems like it has less side effects and not as addicting. I think that the marijuana side might be something good to try, instead of, morphine and Dilat and all that other stuff. So I personally think it's worth a try.
What are your thoughts on marijuana use in the veteran community?
Well, I've seen a lot of veterans that really do use it, and it does help. But unfortunately, some of the policies that the VA have is still associated with the federal government. Gives them a hard time. But I don't mind if they need it, let them use it.
It's good medicine. I have several friends that use it. I use it myself as it's more of a relaxant. It makes me forget about my pain.
The biggest misconception is vets have is they can't smoke is because if they do, they lose their medications. And it's false. As long as they have a medical marijuana card, they cannot touch.
Welcome back. Now we would like to welcome Mary Knox to the show. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you so much for having me, Kira and Kevin.
Hi, Mary. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I've been with the DA's office here in Contra, Costa County for about 32 years now, and have had the opportunity to watch as the drug laws have changed in California. And it has been particularly interesting with the passage of Proposition 64 to be part of a group that has been helping to advise our Board of Supervisors on the changes in the laws and how they affect marijuana delivery and retail establishments and agriculture in the unincorporated areas of the county.
Great.
So tell us a little bit about the new laws and how it affects the individual who may be driving around with marijuana in their car.
Well, the new law basically allows anyone over the age of 21 to legally possess, I'm going to say less than an ounce of marijuana and to transport the marijuana. There's a caveat to that, though. You cannot have an open container of marijuana in a car, much like an open container of alcohol. And so you can transport and possess less than an ounce of marijuana and do it legally.
Okay. And now, is someone able to consume cannabis and drive? What are the legalities with that?
No, the law specifically prohibits anyone from driving under the influence of marijuana or the combined effect of marijuana and alcohol, just as we have the laws regulating drunk driving, if you will, or alcohol impaired driving.
And how are they testing for that?
Marijuana raises some interesting issues because, as some of your other guests have pointed out, we don't have any federal research, which is research that's established the safe levels of alcohol in the bloodstream, that established our, for example, 0.08% blood alcohol content. So with marijuana, the police officers are specifically trained in impairment studies. They have different divided attention tasks, as well as tests that allow them to study the physical impact of the marijuana on a driver. So it's a series of different physical tests or mental tests for this drug recognition expert to be able to come to the conclusion that a driver is impaired by the use of marijuana.
Okay. And so what if someone doesn't pass the test? What happens then?
Then just as an alcohol impaired driver would be, someone's arrested and then they go through the criminal justice process.
Okay.
But again, to go back to your earlier statement with regards to detecting, is it zero? I mean, alcohol used to be 0.1, and then it dropped to 0.08 because more research showed that the impairment wasn't proper and the adjustment was made through research. We acknowledge the fact that that research hasn't occurred yet, and yet it became legal. So that's a little difficult. But how do you, is it zero? I mean, is there a test that they would then give to the individual when they got to the detention center that would test for marijuana in their system, or how does that work?
Well, a person can either do a urine test or a blood test to determine the levels of THC in their systems, but it is not zero tolerance, it's impairment.
Okay.
So just as the breath test or the blood or urine test can determine whether or not you have alcohol in your system, it's whether or not that alcohol is impairing your driving. And for us, since we've done the impairment studies and established the blood alcohol content levels, we know that at a 0.08, most drivers are impaired for purposes
And it's really a reaction. They're really testing your ability to react to what's going on around you and to be aware of what's going on around you.
Correct.
We have a Facebook question that here you might be able to address. Is it legal to send cannabis through the mail?
And again, I have to give a disclaimer here. As with everything in the law, if you change one fact,
Right.
then it changes the answer. I would say it is not legal to send cannabis through the mail. If you think carefully, it's the United States Postal Service.
Right.
And so you would be committing a federal offense.
Okay.
And probably the same with crossing state lines, right?
Exactly. Getting onto an airplane with marijuana with you. An airport is a federal enclave, and so I would just caution people to be very careful just traveling.
Well, that just makes it so
cannabis.
difficult for those that are actually using it for positive medicinal purposes and they're going on a trip. They run a risk then of taking it with them. Is that correct?
Yes, they do, because it is still illegal under federal law.
Wow.
And what about public consumption? Sometimes you may see people using cannabis at concerts or out in public. What are the California laws regarding that?
It is illegal to use cannabis, either smoke it or ingest it in public. It's legal to ingest or smoke it on private property or in your home, for example. It's illegal to ingest or smoke marijuana in a car or to allow your passengers to do so. So in my opinion, the cannabis consumption laws mirror the alcohol consumption laws. So just as you can't allow your passengers to have open containers in your car, you can't allow open containers of marijuana as well.
So
Great
what are some
points.
public safety concerns?
I think public safety concerns that have really been at the forefront over the last few months since the legalization have been people who are driving under the influence of marijuana or combined influence of marijuana and alcohol that have resulted in really a tragic number of traffic fatalities, including a CHP officer in Alameda County. So I think from my perspective, just being in law enforcement, that's what I see the most of. So not being in the healthcare profession, I'm focused on marijuana use that has either created a crime or a loss of life.
Absolutely. And you work a lot with, as you had mentioned, advising the Board of Supervisors with regards to the growing, selling, distributing of marijuana within the county outside of the city jurisdictions. Is that correct?
That's
Cities
correct.
handle that themselves. What kind of challenges are you coming up with there with regards to farms cropping up or too close to residents and all the above?
I've been working with a really interesting group of professionals in the county, from healthcare professionals to land use experts to water use experts. It really is a very complicated and complex set of issues to really implement the laws with regard to the retail establishments, with regard to agriculture, with regard to manufacturing. Compounds for producing like the THC-based products in a safe and legal way in compliance with the law. So the Board of Supervisors has taken a very impressive, reasoned approach to the implementation in our county to make sure that it makes sense for all the citizens, but also follows the intent and the spirit of the legalization laws.
Now, are users able to grow their own cannabis in their homes now?
Yes, it's legal for anyone over 21 years of age to grow up to 6 plants inside a house or on your property, but in a place that can be locked and is not open to public view to discourage the potential for robberies or burglaries related to the theft of growing marijuana plants.
Makes a lot of sense.
Interesting. I happen to be on, I want to say the county has done a pretty good job of trying to inform the unincorporated areas. I happen to be on the board of directors of a town that's unincorporated, and the county has sent people out to talk to us and to help educate our constituents or to educate those that live outside of a city limits with regards to what they can expect. And there have been some very strict areas of safety put around schools, around where people live, by the Board of Supervisors to make sure that people are comfortable with the changing laws. I mean, they're changing so quickly, it's hard to keep up.
They are, and it even brings up issues with water use in our county and really being, cognizant of drought conditions and things like that. And so the supervisors have put a tremendous amount of thought and research into the decisions that they're making.
Well, Mary, we want to thank you very much for coming on and helping us to learn a little bit more of what's happening here locally with regards to the growth and distribution of marijuana and the law. And thank you for coming on the show. We appreciate it very much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Please stay with us. Next, we will be speaking to Dr. Joan Coton from the Martinez VA. Thanks, Mary. Appreciate it. Now I'd like to welcome Dr. Joan Coton to the show. Doctor, it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's been interesting listening to all the previous, certainly addressing one issue where medical is not in great shape, and that is knowing how to dose and getting ready for the probable hostile questions about the VA. It definitely has a history of being not very, I think, very greatly from doctor to doctor. I think there have always been doctors within the VA who were aware of the uses. Dronabinol and some of the other drugs have been on the market for a long time and been used, and the use for pain. I think our pain specialist has not kicked people out, but particularly because we have a lot of doctors who come from the military, where it's zero tolerance, or people who have certain attitudes or fears that we work in a federal system and it could get you in trouble. So,
well, nobody wants to lose their benefits, and nobody wants to be at risk. I mean, because especially for people that this is their, with the medical expenses the way they are today, nobody wants to take that chance that they may lose their benefits. How would you express to a veteran the balance between being brutally honest with your caretaker, because you don't want to have cross prescriptions. You don't want to have one thing affect the other and then not. And
I think that it's helped that there have been some directives saying that, it's not punitive. We cannot write a letter that says, yes, medical marijuana, but I've definitely written letters that said this person has covered all the different meds that we know. We've attempted various treatments. They haven't been effective, and they then take it to an outside doctor who then writes a letter for medical marijuana before it was January. So it's not as if it's been impossible. But I think it's a bigger problem that it hasn't really been well studied. And what we've got is a system of a brain system that's highly influenced by stress, that's really integral to how humans operate in a lot of ways that we barely understand. And, even though CBD antagonizes some of the negative effects of THC, the ways in which it does it aren't all that well understood. It has effects inside cells, it has effects on neurotransmitters. It's a very complicated problem pharmacologically.
Well, doctor, we have a phone call that I'd like to take. Caller? Are you there?
Yes. Yes.
Hey, Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, sir. How you doing?
I'm doing well. You have a question for us or a comment?
Yeah, just I just wanted to give a quick little my 2 cents about medical marijuana use and veterans.
Sure.
I was a cannabis user for about 5 years when I got out, and it helped me with a lot of my post-traumatic stress symptoms. And without it, I probably wouldn't have been able to reintegrate back into society as I did. And even though I was using marijuana, I'm not using it no more because I have goals that I want to attain to, and I want to, try to get a job. But it really did help with my sleep and my anxiety. And I think there's too much stigma surrounding marijuana, and it's demonized in the worst possible way when it's one of the most natural substances here on earth, and there's so many uses for it. And not only, does it help, me and my symptoms, but there's other veterans and other people that can benefit from it as well. It's been, a miracle the way it helped me in my life. And, it was just, it was hard coming back home, and it helped me calm down, and it really just kind of, mellowed me out. And I wasn't using medical marijuana, to get stoned. I was actually using it to adjust when I was uncomfortable. And at the same time, I was going to school, and I still had a 3.5 GPA after doing 10 years in the military and still going to school. I was very active, going swimming, studying, and I could focus. And I think, when there's an overuse of it, that's when it becomes a problem. But when I quit, it wasn't, I didn't have, only symptoms I really had is my nightmares came back. When I was using marijuana, I didn't have any nightmares, and I slept better, and I had a better sleeping schedule. But that was the one downfall. My nightmares are still there, but, I'm going to try to get a job. And plus, I felt like it helped me in the transition period that I needed it. And I quit overnight. And other than that, I think it should be legalized federally, and the veterans should be able to have access to it.
Well, Joe, I want to thank you very much, and I want to applaud you on a couple things. First of all, your 3.5 GPA, and secondly, the fact that you're out there trying to make yourself better, and you're out there looking for a job, and you're in touch with yourself enough to know what's working for you and what's not. So I want to thank you very much for that call, and that was great information.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Wait, hold on a second, Joe. Did you have something you
I
want to
was
say?
going to just respond, though. There are a lot of other aspects of treatment. I think a big one is that there are certain therapies that really help, particularly the nightmares of PTSD. And we haven't yet mentioned certain kinds of psychotherapies, meditation. There's a lot of interventions. There are medicines that are actually very effective and are very safe. And, you know, I often see people coming out of the military who've been overloaded on meds. The first thing we do is taper off. But as you do that in a responsible way, you'll often find there are one or two things they've been on that really were helpful if the dose is lowered. And cannabis isn't the only alternative, and it isn't a cure-all. I think the people who get paranoid, I have had a number of vets who've been pushed to use marijuana because their buddies have found it so helpful, when in fact it makes them more paranoid and more anxious, and they do better with other things. So.
Well, Joe, again, I want to thank you for your phone call and for and again applaud you for what you're doing with your life. Thank you for calling.
So,
thank you, sir.
Dr. Coton, a recent study done by the American Legion shows that about 22% of veterans are currently using cannabis. Why is it so important for those veterans using cannabis to communicate with their doctors or their psychiatrists that they are using cannabis?
I think there's several reasons that it's really important. One is cannabis can be a troublesome drug. There are people who overuse it. The focus needs to be on people functioning, being able to go to school, get enough sleep, do what they need to do. And if they're not doing that, it would be very easy to say, oh my goodness, you're depressed, put people on meds that in fact are inappropriate. You know, the interactions are not always totally harmless, and it's useful. It's true, the research really hasn't been done. There was actually a kind of interesting article I sent to people from Rolling Stone about how impossible it is to do research and, you know, on marijuana at all in this country, not just in the VA. But it's
because of the federal laws.
Because of the federal laws and because of the restrictions and because you're supposed to only use from a certain supplier, and that may actually not be very well characterized at all. There's a number of problems with that. But you know, when you don't know what people are on and you make medical decisions, you know, it's certainly possible for somebody that they're using too much, and I have had vets who get in trouble.
Well, we have a comment here from Leanne on Facebook. I understand there are medical benefits from using marijuana, but aren't there any alternative or holistic remedies that aren't, and I don't know if she really means opiates here or psychotropics that would benefit?
I think that there are a lot of alternatives. I think if you look at 20 years ago versus now, people have really found ways to do interventions with mindfulness, ways to do interventions with yoga, breathing exercises. Therapy can be really helpful. And I know people often come in saying, I want you to take this thought out of my head. But in fact, we find that having them process those thoughts and those feelings end up being very helpful. There's a lot of evidence that exercise is extremely effective for nightmares and for sleep and for PTSD. There are a number of medications that are not opioids. They're, quote, psychotropics, but you know, there are some antidepressants that really help pain a lot. You know, besides cannabis, I think there are a lot of alternatives. People really do need to not cut themselves off from getting help, because one way or another, people can get better and really get.
Are there any medications that you know of that have can possibly interact with cannabis in a harmful way?
I'm not not sure I know of particular negative interactions. Cannabis has its anti-anxiety effects through the serotonin system, so that's conceivably a problem area. One thing that I noticed, I don't know, 20 years ago, Vietnam vets, they started getting checked on the job for drugs. And I had a number of guys who had been more or less doing okay, but they had to stop. And there's a medicine called buspirone that actually seemed to very much replace what marijuana did for the anxiety, because the CBD works through serotonin receptors. So, you know, we've got a lot to learn. I don't know of particular dangers except for people getting more psychotic, but that's not a drug interaction.
So, whether you're using cannabis, whether you're using the THC or the CBD or whatever, it's just like any other drug that's prescribed to you, or it's like a lot of other drugs
that are prescribed,
that are prescribed or aren't.
Yeah.
That you just have to find the one that works for you.
And you have to use common sense.
Yeah, right, and be in touch.
Thoughtfulness.
Be in touch with what's going on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show and all of the useful information.
Thank you, Doctor.
We hope you've enjoyed our show tonight. Before we go, we want to direct you to a few events and resources. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel by searching for Veterans Voices of Contra Costa County.
To learn more about how the VA treats cannabis, please visit publichealth.va.gov/marijuana. The Concord Vet Center offers readjustment counseling to all combat veterans and their families. Please call them at 925-680-4526 to make an appointment. The Veterans Crisis Line connects veterans in crisis and their families and friends with qualified, caring Department of Veteran Affairs responders through a confidential toll-free hotline, online chat, or text. Veterans and their loved ones can call 1-800-273-8255 and press 1. You can chat online or send a text message to 838-255. The Martinez Outpatient Clinic offers mental health services. You can call the Martinez Behavioral Health Clinic at 925-372-2105 to make an appointment.
Are you a veteran who would like an opportunity for your voice to be heard? Well, our A Veteran's Voice segment is designed to provide space for veterans to share anything they want about themselves, such as poetry, a story, or a piece of art. Our program wants to support you by inviting you onto our A Vet's Voice segment. Please connect with us by emailing veteransvoices@contracostatv.org.
To rewatch tonight's episode, check back on our homepage later this week or check with your cable provider schedule for rebroadcast times. Our next live broadcast will be Monday, August 20th, where again, our subject will be opioids. Be sure to tune in. As a special tribute tonight, we would like to take a moment to remember a great man and World War II veteran, Art Gaskins. Art recently passed away at the age of 99 years. Art served as the senior docent at the Veteran Memorial Building in Danville in recent years and found deep meaning in staying connected to and serving others in the community. Art, you will be missed.